Hey guys, welcome back to another tutorial from ADSR and MassiveSynth.com. If you are not signed up for the YouTube channel and you'd like to stay up to date with all of our releases, you can do that at youtube.com/ADSR Tuts. So today I'm going to be looking at a sound set I released on ADSR exclusively to ADSR last month called EDM Trap Volume 1. Comes with 175 massive presets and just a ton of bonus things like I think it's like 150, 175 drums, tons of drums, MIDI, Logic templates, all that. You can check all that out. But I'm going to recreate this lead sound from it today in the demo. And I'm also going to cover some general mixing tips and tricks you can do with your trap drops and things like EDM Trap. So before we even get into it, I do have an instance of, I bounced it to audio just for the video purpose, but I pulled up one of the synth patches. They're actually called synth, and I just played a low bass progression that was mimicking my 808. So that has a little bit of low content. Most of the patches are EQ'd how they should be if a bass or a lead. You know, a bass will have more bass and lead will have more high end, less bass. But what I would do in an actual mix was, if I was doing a full song with this, I'd put an instance of a EQ, just a simple EQ, on both the bass and the drum track. So this one over here on the right is attached to the drums, which I bounced. That's where the sub's happening. So that's that sub right there. And then if you look at this one, there's that bass. So there's a little conflicting frequencies going on between 50 to 100. I don't need that in there, because there's enough of that on the sub channel, on the sub bass track. So I would EQ a little bit of that out, and then I even EQ'd some of the sub out because it was too much. So moving down the line, I have this track, and all these drum samples come from the pack. I created this pattern, and I called it accent drums. So you'll notice right there that it pans. This little snare section pans back and forth. So all I did was make 4 different tracks and put a snare with different volume levels, same snare, different volume levels on each track, panned it, and then when I bounced it together, you get that kind of motion moving from left to right, which is a really popular thing to do in trap music. So what I'll do in a mix is, if you think, okay, bass is going to be center, sub's going to be center, most of the snares are going to be center, like the big snare on this track is going to be in the center, and this drop center. That drop sound for the lead is all center. You have too much in the center. So what I would do is I would just duplicate my accent drum track, and I will put it, I'm not going to put it a hard pan because I have those snares going left to right, which would kind of nullify it. But I will pan it out to about 45, 50, anywhere around in there. So we'll do 40. And that will kind of spread things out a little. All right, so things are fitting together better in the context of a mix just by, with the basses, carving out your EQs, because it kind of has the same effect as to an overall mix as panning. It's obviously not spreading anything out spatially in a mix, but you're letting frequencies on certain tracks breathe and taking out certain ones that don't need to be there. So now these 4 tracks are all fitting together a lot nicer. All right, and another trick that I have learned, along the way with trap and things like drop-heavy genres of EDM, it helps if you squash the hell out of the lead sound. So I have an instance of the sausage fattener on this massive patch. So see how it's dancing around a little? Well, it sounds cleaner and clearer if you can do it with a compressor too. I just typically go for the sausage fattener. See how it's not jumping around, it's even. You could do this with a limiter. I can put up like a fab filter limiter. So you can do it both ways. You can even do it with a compressor if you turn the ratio up really, really high. So that helps even things out, because if you have it kind of bouncing around up and down with volume, it can get a little weak sounding. All right, so moving on to the this track I labeled kick and snare. So the snare is just a snare sample from the pack, but I wanted to show you how you go about making, some of you might be curious on how you make those 808 kicks. There's a difference between an 808, like a synth 808, and a 808 kick. An 808 kick is a blend between the two. So here is a sample from the pack. It's a really weak, and you might think kind of a otherwise bad sounding sample, but it's like that for a reason. It's because you can blend this with an 808 sound. So here is an 808 patch from the sound set. So that is just like a sub, right? Like an 808 type sub sound. So there's not a lot of pop to it. I have it blended with the kick now. So you can see that it's just hitting every time that the sub is. So I played the sub with the progression, and then every time I just layered in a kick. So there's a kick, there's a kick, there's a kick, there's a new note, there's a new note, there's a new note of the sub. And you blend those two together. And you actually start to get that, you get the punch of the drum, and you get that low rumbling sub 808 feel that's a mainstay to trap. So that's how I did that. So that's a cool tip and trick if you guys have been, if any of you have been struggling with getting a punchy 808 sub. And another thing you can do in massive, you can make one of these short attack, sharp decay envelopes and apply it to the pitch of your sine sub bass. And you'll get more snap to it. So then you don't have to layer as big of a kick together with that to kind of get that punch and snap through your mix. So that's just a little quick tip and trick you can do with your 808 and kicks to get them to punch more in your trap drops. So moving on, let's jump into creating this sound. So I have a new instance of Massive pulled up and ready to go. First thing I'm going to do is in oscillator 1, I'm going to select kind of a weird waveform here. I'm going to select this AI waveform, and then I'm going to pitch this up to 0.21 to give it some detune. So here's what we got so far. Alright, I'm going to keep the wavetable position up all the way, and I'm going to turn this intensity down to about 45, maybe just a hair under 50%. Keep the amp all the way up and crank this slider up to F1. Now I'm going to activate oscillator 2, and in oscillator 2 I'm just going to keep it on the square saw. I'm going to pitch this down all the way to negative 24, and then, or 24.1 to be precise. And for the wavetable position, intensity, and amp and all that, keep it where it is, but we are going to change it from spectrum to bend. Gives it more of a kind of a nasally sound, which will play nicely with the filter. So when I was making the sound, I was kind of thinking ahead as, I want this kind of saw sound that doesn't have a lot of depth to it as far as harmonic content. So I did pitch this down just to get a different frequency spectrum going with from oscillator 1 to oscillator 2 to oscillator 3. So oscillator 3, I'm going to pitch down to negative 12. So with these drop sounds, you need, unless you're going for like a straight high-pitched pluck, if you're going for kind of that saw square type super saw lead, you'll hear a lot in trap productions. It helps to have multiple frequencies represented in oscillators, whatever synth you're using. But with Massive, it's easy. I have one at negative 12, 24, and 0, so then it's a much thicker sound. So in oscillator 3, I'm going to select this pulse saw waveform, and I'm going to turn the the pulse saw position down to just under halfway, and I'm going to keep the pulse width up all the way, and then make sure the amp's up all the way. And I'm going to select F1 and F1 for both of these. So here's what we have so far. Alright, now activate the modulation oscillator. I'm going to add some phase to this sound to help thicken it up a little bit more. And I'm going to apply phase to the oscillator 1, which is going to affect this AI waveform. And I'm actually going to turn this down a little to about 25-30%. Alright, and I'm also going to add some position, which is going to affect the wavetable position with the modulation oscillator as well, and I want that to affect the oscillator 1. So I'm going to drag this position all the way up. So it's making the sound a little bit richer. It's almost adding kind of an LFO effect to it. So now with the noise, I'm just going to bump the white noise up a little. All right, and now let's go to, because we're down in this section massive, I'm just going to add the insert effect. I'm going to add the sine shaper, and I'm going to turn the dry wet down and then turn the drive down a little bit too. So dry wet should be a little bit higher than the drive. I'm going to go to my routing tab real quick to make sure that I didn't have some weird routing setting. No, we're good. So let's go on to, now that we got the oscillators and the modulation oscillator taken care of. I'm going to go to the filter section, and I'm going to select the low pass 4 filter. And I'm going to leave the cutoff there. It's going to sound really weird, but I'm going to modulate the cutoff with an envelope here in a little bit. So let's go down to this middle section, the brains kind of massive, and in the oscillator tab, I'm gonna swap this macro out. I'm gonna swap it with number 2 because I want to keep it. I want to keep it on the vibrato. I'm gonna keep it where it is by default, and I'm just gonna boost this up a good amount. So that's gonna help give it that kind of super saw sound because it's like a pseudo unison type effect if you boost the vibrato enough, but it's going to make it a lot thicker. So keep that vibrato macro going. And now I'm going to create a macro for the cutoff here. I'm going to call this cutoff. And I'm going to boost that. And we can always come back to that later. So turn the resonance down, as we don't really need any of that going on right now. And so with the we don't want restart via gate, anything like that checked. With saw sounds, you typically don't. So going on to the voicing tab, going to need to make some changes in this section. I'm going to boost the unisono up to 6 voices, and I'm going to activate this pitch cutoff. So this will make the sound louder, so I'm going to turn down the master. All right, and so I'm going to turn this number right here down a little bit because it lets you boost the amount of the unison spread further. So right now it's going to be crazy sounding. See how it starts to get a little weird? Now if I turn this down, it allows me to move this out a little bit further before I start to get that kind of nasty sound. So I'm going to bump this out almost to halfway, maybe in between halfway. All right, and then activate this pan position knob to help give the sound some width. And that's about right, because with the drop sound, I'm not going to have a lot of other things left and right except for maybe those accent drums. So I'll take that. And with the, make sure that you have the trigger on always, and I'm going to select monophonic for this. So that will come into play with our glide, so make sure you don't have the glide too high if you're trying to recreate the sound that you heard in the demo. So that squares away the voicing sections and the routing and all that. So now we just need to really go through the envelopes and then the effects. All right, in envelope 1, it's going to be kind of a crazy sound. What you're going to do is you're going to turn the attack all the way down, turn the level down a little bit, turn the decay down all the way, or almost all the way, maybe 15-20%. And then turn the level down to just maybe a hair above 0. And now we're going to add a little morph loop here. I'm going to morph loop, I'm going to have it loop once. And I'm going to keep it on 1 and 1. So then I'm going to turn this level up, which will boost the loop section. And now turn the release up to about halfway. It should bring in this line to a good amount of the ways in. So this S slope, you're going to take down as well. So it kind of makes this section shorter in between the end point of the beginning point of the loop and the end point. So take that down, and then I'm going to boost this morph up a little bit so it's a smoother transition. So what we're doing is I'm going to use this to modulate a couple things, but I want to kind of get that cool bounce in that release. I didn't just want your standard release with the sound, so I did this. So this line right here with that's kind of tied to the decay and the release should be in are just at the end of the word save. And this line right here should be near the word trig 0 reset. And you can control that more tightly with this slope knob. So now I'm going to drag the crosshair to that, and I'm going to modulate up on our cutoff for filter 1. All right, and now we're going to go to, let's jump over to envelope 4, as that's tied to the output by default, so we need to make some changes. Turn the attack all the way in, keep the level all the way up. Turn this level and the decay down to maybe just a hair above or shade above halfway, and then crank this release up. So this line should be around, if you turn the decay up actually all the way on this one. This release point should be a little bit over halfway. So with the decay all the way up and the release above halfway, this little line right here should be right around linear and gate. And that will really bring the sound together, as you guys can hear. So you can control the cutoff, that macro that we created. And what I really like about the sound is, a good tip with sound design, is it sounds good without effects. That's always a good sign. A lot of sounds will just drench in effects to make them sound good. It's always helpful if you have a strong sound before you even hit the effects section in Massive. So that being said, I'm going to activate a little bit of reverb. I'm going to turn the dry wet down, turn the size up, turn the density up, and turn the color up a little so it's a brighter reverb. All right, and then in FX2, I'm gonna do something to kind of make the sound even wider, because there's not that many sounds going on in my drop. I'm gonna turn on the dimension expander. I'm gonna turn the dry wet just up a hair, and the dry and the size up just a little bit as well. And finally, I'm going to EQ it. I try to EQ most of my patches in a musical way. So this is a lead sound, so I'm going to cut the bass. I don't need as much bass because it'll be conflicting with this bass synth and the sub drum, the sub kick. I'm going to turn this boost up a little, so it'll be a little bit more of a nasal sound. I'm going to turn the frequency and the high shelf up as well. Alright, so that squares away the effects. Then there's one more thing I have to do. I do need to modulate two things with our fourth envelope. So I'm going to modulate the saw position of oscillator 3 out a little, and then I'm going to modulate the amp of oscillator 3 as well. So basically this long release time is what's kind of controlling that saw position. Of course the attack and the decay is, but that's why I chose this envelope as opposed to envelope 1. And finally, to make the sound even a hair thicker, I'm going to go to, I think I chose 7 on this, but you can obviously do it with 5. I'm going to go to an LFO. I'm going to keep the rate in the middle, the amp where it is, keep basically everything how it is, and then I'm just going to drag this into the pitch of my oscillator 1 and drag this up to down to negative 0.25, just to give it a little bit of thickness. So that is basically the sound, guys, that we heard in the demo. If you guys have any questions or comments, let me know below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you haven't checked out EDM Trap Volume 1, head on over to massivesynth.com and give it a listen. And I hope you guys found some of the mix tricks useful. And if you have any questions on those, don't hesitate to ask. I'll be happy to help. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.